Welcome to today's deep dive. I am your host, and I'm thrilled to be here with our resident expert to unpack what is honestly one of the most baffling geographic mysteries out there.
Glad to be here. Yeah, we have a really fascinating set of sources today.
We do. So to start things off, I want you to try a little visualization exercise with me. Just imagine you are drifting in the International Space Station.
Oh, that's a great way to look at it.
Right. You're looking down at the Earth on the night side, and you pass over Australia.
Which is always a really distinctive sight from space because of how coastal the population is.
Exactly. You look at the southeast corner places like Sydney and Melbourne and Adelaide, and it's this brilliant, tangled web of gold light. It's super dense.
They're very heavily populated.
But then you look way over to the west coast and you see Perth. It's this bright, lonely beacon just staring out at the Indian Ocean.
But then your eyes naturally drift to the middle, that massive space between Adelaide and Perth.
And that is where the lights just go out.
Completely dark.
It is like someone took an eraser to the satellite data. There is a stretch of coastline over 1,000 kilometers long that is effectively a black void.
It really is one of the most striking visual features of the inhabited world. I mean, it looks like a whole piece of the continent has just been switched off.
And if you look at a map, this makes absolutely no sense. I mean, it's coastline.
Right.
In California or the Mediterranean, this would be prime real estate. You'd have resorts and harbors and massive cities.
But here it's arguably the world's largest unparalleled emptiness. We are talking, of course, about the Great Australian Bight and the Nullarbor Plain.
A region that has completely defied settlement for centuries.
Oh, yeah.
So the mission for this deep dive, based on the sources we've compiled, is to figure out why. We have 21st century tech now, we have desalination, we have satellite internet, we have air conditioning.
We built Las Vegas in the middle of a desert.
Exactly. So why does this massive chunk of Australia basically refuse to be tamed?
It's a great question, and the answer we get from the research isn't just one single thing. It is a perfect storm of 3 layers.
Yeah, break that down for us.
Well, first you have a geology that actively repels human life. Then you have a coastline that acts like a literal military fortress. And finally, an economic reality that makes building there complete financial suicide.
Let's start with the ground itself then, because even the name Nullarbor sounds like something out of a fantasy novel. Like Mordor, but flatter.
It does sound incredibly dramatic, but it's actually just brutally literal Latin, nullus arbor.
Meaning no trees.
No trees. Truth in advertising right there.
Yeah, I mean, you can't say they didn't warn you.
Absolutely. And when you are out there, you realize why. The sources highlight that the Nullarbor is the world's largest single piece of limestone bedrock.
Wow.
It is a slab of rock about 200,000 square kilometers in size. And it was once a shallow seabed millions of years ago before the whole continent uplifted.
200,000 square kilometers of just flat rock.
Hmm.
I was reading some accounts in the materials from people driving the air highway across this plain, and they describe it as hallucinatory.
Oh, it totally messes with your depth perception. The road is just a dead straight line for hundreds of kilometers.
And the heat haze.
The horizon literally shimmers because of it. It is impossibly aggressively flat.
And incredibly hot. We aren't talking about a nice dry heat here. We're talking about conditions where birds literally fall out of the sky.
It is extreme. In the summer, the ground temperature can easily hit 50 degrees Celsius.
That's over 120 Fahrenheit.
Right. But then in winter, because there's absolutely no vegetation to hold any of that heat, it drops below freezing at night.
And so no wonder early explorers were horrified by it. There's a quote in the sources from one explorer who famously called it a hideous anomaly. A blot on the face of nature.
Which is a bit harsh, honestly, especially considering what's actually underneath it, because this is where the geology gets really wild.
Yeah, this part blew my mind. The sources explain that this flat, boring surface is actually a complete lie.
That is the big twist. The Nullarbor is what geologists call a karst landscape.
Okay, let's unpack karst for a second for everyone listening. This is basically what happens when water meets soluble rock, right?
Exactly. Rainwater is slightly acidic. So over millions of years, it slowly eats away at the limestone. So while the surface looks like this solid concrete slab, the underground is actually like a giant hollow sponge.
A honeycomb.
Right. A massive network of caves and sinkholes and tunnels.
So if you were driving across the plain, you are technically driving over the roof of a cathedral.
A very dangerous cathedral, yes. There are over 4,500 known features down there, and some of them are just massive.
Like Abercrombie Cave.
Yes. Abercrombie Cave has the largest single chamber in the southern hemisphere. You could easily fit an entire city block inside it.
And the coolest part, literally the coolest part, are the blowholes. The research describes them as the earth breathing.
And that isn't just a poetic metaphor, it's actual physics. Because the cave volume down there is so huge, when the barometric pressure changes on the surface, say a big storm front rolls in, the air pressure inside the earth has to equalize.
So the air either rushes in or out.
With incredible force, it roars. If you stand near one of these blowholes, you can actually feel the earth inhaling or exhaling. It creates this very eerie sense that the landscape is an organism.
And inside these caves, it acts as a perfect time capsule. Because it's so incredibly dry and the temperature is so stable, things just don't rot.
Precisely. Scientists have found mummified remains of thylacines down there.
The Tasmanian tiger.
Right, and marsupial lions that are perfectly preserved. But it's not just dead things either. These deep caves have their own unique biology.
Oh, the bizarre, blind creatures.
Yeah, evolution does really strange things in total darkness. They have found spiders and crustaceans and wasps that have completely lost their eyes and their pigment.
Because they just don't need them?
Exactly. And they exist nowhere else on the planet except in these limestone pockets beneath the desert.
So on top, it's this hideous blot, as that guy said, but underneath it is a biological treasure chest.
It is, but of course that doesn't really help you if you are trying to build a farm or a city on the surface. There is no soil, it's just rock and dust.
Okay, so the land is clearly hostile. But usually in human history, if the land is bad, we just cling to the coast, we build a port, we fish, we trade.
Yeah.
So why is the Great Australian Bight so completely empty of ports?
Because the Nullarbor doesn't end in a nice, gentle beach. It just snaps off.
I have seen photos of this, the Bunda Cliffs. It looks like a glitch in a video game where the map just abruptly stopped.
That's a great way to describe it. It's a geological clean cut. You have a vertical wall of limestone up to 120 meters high,
That is like a 40-story building.
stretching for 200 kilometers.
A 200-kilometer wall.
Without a single break. There are no estuaries, no river deltas, no gentle slopes down to the water. It is a literal fortress.
So if you were a sailor in the 1800s and you desperately needed fresh water, or you had to repair your ship, looking at those cliffs was effectively a death sentence.
There is physically no way to access the interior from the water.
And the water at the bottom of those cliffs isn't exactly a calm tropical lagoon either.
Far from it. You are staring down the barrel of the Southern Ocean there. Specifically what sailors call the Roaring Forties.
I've always heard that term Roaring Forties, but the sources really help me understand the mechanics of it. It isn't just that it's far south, right?
Right. It's all about the lack of friction. If you look at a globe right at 40 degrees south latitude, there is almost no landmass to interrupt the wind. It is just ocean basically all the way around the planet.
So the wind just accelerates forever.
Exactly. It builds up kinetic energy over thousands and thousands of miles. By the time it hits the Great Australian Bight, it creates massive swells and incredibly violent storms.
So you have an ocean that wants to kill you crashing against a cliff that won't let you land. However, and this is the part of the research I really loved, this violence is actually the secret engine of life down there.
It is the great paradox of the Bight, that violence acts as a massive nutrient pump.
This is the upwelling concept.
Right. Those intense westerly winds constantly push the warm surface water away from the coast, and to fill that sudden gap, freezing cold water from the deep ocean floor rushes up to the surface.
And that deep water is basically liquid fertilizer.
It is totally loaded with nitrates and phosphates from centuries of decaying organic matter on the seafloor. When all of that hits the sunlight at the surface, you get a massive plankton bloom.
And plankton feeds the krill and the small fish,
Which feed the squid, which then feed the apex predators.
which makes this dead coast an absolute biodiversity superpower. The stats and the sources were just staggering. 85% of the species here are endemic.
85%! That is even higher than the Great Barrier Reef. It is a completely unique evolutionary laboratory.
It's a nursery for the southern right whale.
Yes. And a massive feeding ground for the Australian sea lion. And of course, the great white shark.
So we have a land that cooks you, a coast that blocks you, and an ocean that batters you. It seems pretty clear why Europeans took one look at this place and just said, nope.
It completely explains the European reaction, but we have to be very careful here because there is a common tendency to call this land empty or untouched.
Which is a massive misconception.
It is factually wrong. The Murning people, who are known as the Whale people, have lived there for over 40,000 years. They didn't just barely survive either. They thrived.
And the difference wasn't biology, it was technology.
Mm.
It's not technology in the way we usually think of it, like iPhones or steam engines. It was knowledge technology.
Exactly. The Europeans looked at the landscape and saw a waterless void because they were looking for traditional rivers. The Murning knew the secrets of the Namas.
These are the hidden rock holes.
Yes. They are these specific hidden depressions in the limestone that perfectly trap rare rainwater, and crucially, they keep it cool and capped so it doesn't evaporate in the sun.
And they are mapped in the oral history and the songlines of the people.
Right, so the landscape is essentially like a giant connect-the-dots puzzle. If you know exactly where the dots are, you can cross the continent safely. If you don't, you die.
And that deep habitation is reflected in the archaeology, too. We mentioned the caves earlier, specifically Canalda Cave.
Yes.
This detail completely blew my mind. The finger tracings.
It is incredible. Deep inside the cave, in total pitch black darkness, there are these intricate patterns traced into the soft limestone milk on the walls, and they have been dated to over 20,000 years ago.
That is older than the pyramids.
Older than
Stonehenge.
By a massive, massive margin. It shows a society with incredibly deep spiritual connections operating during the height of the last ice age.
Specifically connections to the whales breeding at the cliffs, right?
Exactly.
So the indigenous people had the literal cheat codes for the landscape, but then the Europeans show up arrogant and unprepared, and it is just disaster after disaster.
It is a whole catalog of failures. You had the Dutch navigator Peter Knights back in 1627. He sailed 1,500 kilometers along the cliffs, got increasingly frustrated, saw absolutely no fresh water, and just logged it as a dangerous, useless coastline.
Then Matthew Flinders comes along in 1802 to map it properly. And he sounded even more annoyed than Knights.
Flinders was a brilliant navigator, but he absolutely hated this coast. He called it the literal opposite of a resource. No wood to fix the ship, no water to drink. He couldn't wait to get out of there.
But the real horror story in the sources, the one that honestly should be a Hollywood movie, is Edward John Eyre.
The Eyre expedition of 1841, this is the absolute definition of learning the hard way.
Eyre was convinced, absolutely certain, that this desert was just a fringe. He thought that if he just walked far enough inland, he'd find a great inland sea or these lush, fertile plains.
The inland sea myth was very popular back then, so he sets out from Adelaide to walk all the way to Albany with a small team, and very quickly the Nullarbor just breaks them.
They didn't find water. They just found heat and flies.
The psychological toll was immense. They ran out of water, the horses started to die of thirst, and in a desperate bid to survive, they actually had to kill and eat the horses.
And then the team fractured. This is the part of the story that gets really dark.
It gets very dark. Eyre had 3 Aboriginal guides and 1 European partner, a man named John Baxter. One night, 2 of the guides, pushed to the absolute brink by starvation and fear, shot and murdered John Baxter.
They took the guns and the supplies and just disappeared into the desert.
Leaving Eyre completely alone with the remaining guide, a man named Wiley. And this is where the narrative circles back to what we said earlier about the indigenous knowledge. Eyre survives only because of Wiley.
Because Wiley knew how to find the Namas.
Wiley could read the land, he could find lizards to eat, he could spot the subtle signs of root water. Without Wiley, Eyre is just another skeleton in the limestone.
Even then, they barely made it. It came down to a literal 1 in a million chance.
They were on the absolute verge of death when they spotted a ship anchored in a tiny, rare cove. It was a French whaling ship called the Mississippi.
Imagine that moment. You've been walking through hell for months. Your friend has been murdered. You are eating lizard skin to survive. And suddenly, a French ship.
The captain took them aboard, fed them, let them rest for 2 solid weeks, and completely restocked their supplies. If that ship isn't there, history records the Eyre expedition as a total loss.
So Eyre finishes the walk, writes his report, and effectively tells the British Empire, do not go there. It is a hellscape.
And that reputation definitely stuck.
And here is the big question for the modern era that the sources try to tackle. That was 1841. We are in 2026. We don't need to walk anymore.
Right.
We have trucks, we have planes, we have technology that would look like pure magic to Edward John Eyre. So why is the population of this entire region still well under 100,000?
It is the obvious question. Look at a place like Phoenix, Arizona. That is a desert. And it has 1.6 million people. Why isn't there a Phoenix of the South on the Great Australian Bight?
Is it just the heat?
It isn't the climate. It is the economics of the climate. To build a modern city, you need to solve 3 major problems. The first one still is water.
But we have desalination now. We can literally turn the ocean into drinking water.
We can. But desalination is violently expensive. It requires massive, massive amounts of energy. In Phoenix, they just divert water from the Colorado River. Gravity does a lot of the work, but in the Brett, you have to manufacture every single drop of water you use.
So the baseline cost of living starts at a premium and just goes up from there.
Exactly. Every shower, every cup of coffee, every watered lawn costs 10 times what it costs in Sydney. Who is going to move out there to pay that?
Okay, so barrier 1 is that water is a poverty trap. What's barrier 2?
The tyranny of distance. This is a classic Australian problem, but out here it is extreme. A city on the Bight connects to absolutely nothing.
It is 1,000 kilometers to Adelaide and 2,000 to Perth.
Right. So if you try to build a city, you have to truck in every single brick, every steel beam, every iPad, every bag of flour from 1,000 kilometers away. The logistics costs are just astronomical.
Usually, though, cities form in hostile places because there is a gold rush element. People tolerate the insane costs because they make so much money extracting something valuable from the ground.
And that brings us to barrier 3, the lack of an economic engine. There is no spark to start the fire.
But wait, Australia is a massive mining superpower. I know there are minerals out there in the Nullarbor.
There are. The region is rich in iron or zircon and other mineral sands. But the way we mine has fundamentally changed. In the old days, you built a whole town next to the mine. Now we use the fly-in, fly-out model.
Ah, the FIFO model.
Yes, FIFO. A mining company just flies workers in from Perth for 2 weeks. They live in a temporary camp, basically very nice shipping containers. They dig the hole and then they fly home.
So they don't buy houses, they don't build schools, they don't open cafes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Modern mining extracts wealth from the region, but it doesn't plant it there. It doesn't build communities.
What about farming, though?
On the Nullarbor, it's impossible. Remember, it's all limestone. There is zero topsoil.
Yeah.
You simply can't grow crops on a rock. Now, on the very edges, like the Eyre Peninsula, you do have wheat and barley. But that is low-density farming. You need thousands of acres for just one family. That doesn't build a metropolis.
And the ocean resources? What about the tuna?
That gave us Port Lincoln. It is known as the seafood capital, famous for southern bluefin tuna, and it is a very wealthy town. But it's a highly specialized niche industry. It creates a rich town of 16,000 people, not a sprawling city of 1 million.
So effectively what the sources are saying is that to live there, you have to constantly fight geography. And fighting geography is the most expensive thing a human civilization can do.
That is the perfect synthesis. The geography acts as an unyielding filter. The limestone prevents the agriculture, the cliffs prevent the ports, and the sheer distance prevents the trade.
It is so interesting because we are completely obsessed with the idea that we can engineer our way out of anything today.
We really are.
We talk about terraforming Mars. We talk about building massive linear cities in the Saudi desert.
We love the narrative of conquest. We genuinely think that enough concrete and electricity can just override nature.
But the great Australian void is sitting right there on our own planet, basically telling us no.
It absolutely proves that nature still dictates the terms. The map isn't blank because we just haven't gotten around to filling it in yet. It is blank because the land actively rejects us.
The inertia of history keeps the lights on in Sydney and Perth, and the Nullarbor just stays dark.
And honestly, maybe that is a good thing. We need places that remind us we aren't the undisputed masters of the universe.
A place where the wind, the rock, and the ocean are the only things that really matter. Well, that is a truly humbling thought. But it does leave me with one final thing to ponder that the sources kind of touch on implicitly. In our hyper-connected modern world, where satellites have mapped every square inch of the globe, maybe humanity actually has a deep psychological need for these massive empty voids to exist.
That's a fascinating point.
Right. Like if every corner of the earth was tamed and paved over, we'd lose that crucial sense of the unknown. The map needs its blank spaces, just so we can remember how small we really are.
I couldn't agree more.
Well, next time you look at a satellite map and you see that big empty darkness, don't just think of it as empty space. Think of it as a fortress that won.
Perfectly said.
That is all for this deep dive. Thanks for listening, and we will catch you on the next one.